August. And now, according to the Sun-Sentinel newspaper, Dr. Brenda Snipes has resigned.
At least 80 people are dead and more than 1,200 still missing in California's devastating wildfires.
When President Trump came here to Malibu yesterday, this is literally what he saw. House after house burned to the ground.
Hundreds of residents in the border city of Tijuana protesting the arrival of Central American migrants.
If you live in a house, you have walls, you have doors, because we don't want to let just anybody go into our house. I consider this country my house.
I think some of our democratic freedoms have been under attack.
Like what? What democratic freedoms have been undermined? We just had an election where we switched power in the House. Democracy is at work. People are voting, and we're in record numbers.
His first ever Cup Series championship. It's Joey Logano who wins.
Short week.
Tuesday and Wednesday.
It's so funny we're playing this song because I went to go do a Fox Nation shoot with the Building Homes for Heroes recipient, and some of the folks that helped build the houses, they were talking about how wonderful it is to be grandparents, and their granddaughter loves this movie, Trolls. And I said, every time we play this song, Brian and Steve, their kids are older, they don't even know that this is part of Trolls. You know that movie Trolls?
Not yet, no.
Exactly.
Not yet.
Exactly.
I'm just focused on Creed 2. But this does remind me of last night. I was dancing on a speaker to this song.
Yeah, he was over at Studio 54.
Right.
It was crazy.
Yeah, it took forever to get in.
You want to see the pictures, go to page6.com. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us on this Monday of a short holiday week. We start with the Fox News alert. Big news. The ballot chaos in Florida now over as that embattled Broward County election supervisor reportedly resigns overnight.
It comes hours after Senator Bill Nelson conceded to Republican Rick Scott in Florida's Senate race.
Griff, why would she resign? I thought it was going so well. Good morning. Well, she lost 2,040 ballots. She missed some deadlines, and she failed to accurately report numbers on election night. And now, according to the Sun-Sentinel newspaper, she's headed for the door effective January 2nd. Yesterday I asked her pointedly, I said, are you worried the governor-elect Ron DeSantis will remove you? Here's what she had to say.
No, I haven't heard anything about that. So, no, my attorney says I should not answer.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Now Governor DeSantis will have an opportunity to replace her officially. Meanwhile, the big news, guys, was after 18 years in office, Bill Nelson in the Senate is conceding after losing by 10,033 votes to Rick Scott. Senator-elect Scott writing an op-ed for Fox News saying, now the voters of Florida have spoken, and I am honored to serve as our state's next senator and share Florida's success with the entire nation. In that other race, the governor, Ron DeSantis, winning, not having to go to a hand recount over Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum. Yesterday, a tweet from Governor-elect DeSantis saying this was a hard-fought election. Now it is time to bring Florida together. So finally, I guess I can't stop the feeling of relief, guys, that the madness in South Florida has officially ended.
Wait a second. Griff Jenkins can disembark? You can go home?
Finally headed home, so we think.
Right,
but nothing's ever official.
I've seen that shirt 4 straight days,
in Florida.
You're probably right.
You're
all right.
the hardest worker in television. Hurricanes and elections, the caravan. Thanks, Griff.
I was talking to Peter Ducey last night, and he's in Tallahassee covering this, and he said that later today, he may be able to go back to his apartment for the first time in 7 weeks. He has not opened the door to his apartment.
Wow.
This is Peter?
For 7 weeks. Yeah, Peter Ducey.
All right.
I'm related.
Another one, hardworking.
I think the writing was on the wall for her 2 days ago when she was counting all the wrong ballots. It was like, we're coming up with the wrong number. Oh, we're running the ag commissioner. We're supposed to do the senator. And then the other thing was when she said, we're missing 2,000 ballots. They are here in the building somewhere. I mean, where else would they be? We'll find them. They never did.
They sent out sample ballots for the 2018 election. The problem is they didn't resemble the actual ballots from the 2018 election. She destroyed 6,000 ballots after they were counted, but a judge ordered them to be preserved in 2016. That's a big oops. She kept the job for 2018. Maybe there's hope in Broward County for a smoother 2020 because there's no excuse now. We all know the counties that are a problem. We know how vital the state is to the outcome for elections. get it together. A little bit later, Governor-elect Ron DeSantis will be joining us live. He got the concession. He didn't need the hand count. Rick Scott, in order to beat Senator Bill Nelson, needed the hand count. He accepted his concession yesterday. So Rick Scott, a good friend to the president's. They've been friends for a long time. He will be an ally in most cases.
Well, Building Homes for Heroes, they build so many houses in the state of Florida because of Rick Scott. They said Rick Scott has secured so much money for that organization, millions of dollars, helping our veterans.
Indeed. All right. Meanwhile, let's go to the other side of the country, out in Tijuana, which is just south of San Diego, California. Remember we told you that the President of the United States had referred to the oncoming caravan as an invasion? You know who agrees with the president?
Who?
Some Mexicans who are looking at this caravan as an invasion. Watch this video montage and you will see what I'm talking about.
They are coming. They are gangs. They are bad people.
Our government has not taken control of these, what we call invasions. If you live in a house, you have walls, you have doors, you have gates. And so we do that because we don't want to let just anybody go into our house. And I consider this country my house on a larger scale. And we should control our borders.
Lo que dijo Donald Trump es verdad. Es una invasión.
What Donald Trump said is true. That man was just shouting through the megaphone. There are 3,000 migrants, mostly Hondurans, that have arrived there at Tijuana, which is the border town that's right underneath San Diego in Mexico. The residents are shouting, "We don't want you here." The mayor says they're probably going to be there for 6 months while they file for asylum. Many people are sympathetic to these individuals, but the residents there, they don't want them in their town. They're worried that their taxes are going to be used to pay for the migrants. They're shouting insults and throwing rocks, and some even threw punches.
They also complained about how the caravan forced their way into Mexico, throwing rocks and bottles at the Mexican border guards or troops, and they ended up just letting them in. They also know the Mexican government at separate times has provided buses for groups of them. That doesn't really make them happy. And if you have a town in a city and you have acquired some affluence in your life, you don't really understand why there's maybe 5,000 sitting in a soccer stadium by you, or laying on the lawn by you, or laying all over the beaches by you, and they know that more are coming behind. Well, so in Mexico, they're calling it an invasion. How could you be on President Trump for saying it's a wrong word? Because their destination is America.
Well, the local shelters in Tijuana are equipped to house 700. They've got 3,000. They're expecting 10,000. The President of the United States tweeted this out yesterday. The mayor of Tijuana, Mexico, just stated that the city is ill prepared to handle this many migrants. The backlog could last 6 months. Likewise, the U.S. is ill prepared for this invasion and will not stand for it. They are causing crime and big problems in Mexico. And then the president says simply to the migrants, go home.
You mentioned the shelters being full. A lot of the women and the kids are in the shelters and the men are sleeping outside. They had to open up a city sports complex. You had people sleeping on the fields. You had like the baseball fields underneath the bleachers, and churches were bringing in portable showers and bathrooms so that the folks could have some water and be able to clean themselves.
If you don't like the term invasion, don't worry about it. The mayor of Tijuana has another term, an avalanche or a tsunami of people. Right. So for people who think it's hyperbole that the president was using it for the election, he was pointing out something for the election, but he tweeted about it again last night. He didn't forget about it, and now all of a sudden you have the Mexican City mayors complaining about it.
Well, keep in mind, remember when this caravan was coming up from Guatemala and Honduras through the Mexican towns, we saw images of the people coming out, the Mexican people coming out, presenting them with food and water and clothes.
Stark contrast now, right?
Everything they needed, and now that they are where they were going to in Mexico, last stop before the United States, the welcome not so
well. That's because they knew they were going in and going out. But then when they reached Tijuana, there's nowhere else to go. And the mayor there says that the federal government says they're expecting it to swell to 10,000 people. Of course. And U.S. border inspectors are only being able to process about 100 asylum claims a day at that crossing.
And you know the new rules. They're going to the port of entry. There's going to be a huge delay. It's going to be catch and detain, not catch and release.
All right, so that's the very latest from Florida and California. And now with the rest of the news from around the world, here's Jillian.
Yep, and she will skip the Eagles game, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, what happened? I woke up this morning angry because of that. Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, it wasn't Rob.
It
was early and you didn't have to watch it.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm glad I was asleep for that. Let's get you caught up on your news. Starting with this Fox News alert right now. At least 80 people are dead and more than 1,200 missing in California's devastating wildfires. A candlelight vigil held in Northern California to honor the 77 victims of the Camp Fire. And Pope Francis sending a special prayer to everyone affected by the fires. Heavy rain in this week's forecast could bring some relief, but there is a new risk of flooding and mudslides in already devastated areas. It is sentencing day for the man who admits to killing his pregnant wife and 2 little girls. Chris Watts could spend the rest of his life behind bars after taking a plea deal to avoid the death penalty in Colorado. He was arrested in August, days after going on TV to beg for the safe return of his family, claiming they were missing. The bodies of Shanann, Celeste, and Bella Watts found days later at the oil field where he worked. Bob Barker is in the hospital for the second time in less than a month. The 94-year-old former Price is Right host rushed to the emergency room in Los Angeles with severe back pain. His manager tells Entertainment Tonight that he is, quote, awake, alert, and improving, but he's up and down. Barker was also hospitalized with back pain at the end of October. President Trump and First Lady Melania will receive the national Christmas tree at the White House today. The nearly 20-foot-tall, 800-pound Fraser fir, chosen from a farm in North Carolina. It's scheduled to arrive at the White House around 1 o'clock Eastern time, but it won't be lit up until next Wednesday, so you're going to have to wait to see that.
Indeed. All right. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you.
You know what he should put the stand on, have the guys put the stand on in the woods, because you don't want to do that at your house.
Although this is the people's house, and the way they look for a tree that will fit exactly, so it just, we've all been there for years, it'll just touch the roof of the White House, so it'll stand 20 feet, their light bill.
How do you find a stand for, what, they put it in a bucket, right? You have to put it in a bucket and cover it.
I think the Park Service probably has some special White House Christmas tree stand.
I mean, you know how hard it is to put a stand on an 8-foot tree.
I am so proud of myself when I go to the Christmas tree place and I bring my stand from the previous year, because then I get a pro to put it on, and I know it's going to be straight.
Are you one of those that keeps the stand? I don't, because I live in a small apartment. There's no place to store it. I'd rather just buy a new one every year.
Really? I keep the stand.
But you have an attic. You have a house.
Right. That's a little different. Okay.
Under the bed.
What do you do?
Slide it under the bed.
Yours is under the bed?
We now have an electric. We have an artificial tree that comes with a stand.
Nice.
It's so much easier. We keep it in Peter's bedroom, in the closet. All right. Meanwhile, 6:13 here in New York City. New York Times asking the big question about who will lead House Democrats. If not Pelosi, whom? Lisa Booth is here with an answer, and she's coming up next.
And could peanut allergies soon be a thing of the past?
Yep.
All right, this morning, the New York Times asking the big questions about the future of the Democratic leadership. Quote, if not Pelosi, who? Adding, what if House Democrats tried to stage a coup and nobody showed up to take power? That is the predicament facing Democrats as a quiet rebellion simmers in their ranks to block Representative Nancy Pelosi from being Speaker again. Fox News contributor Lisa Booth joins us now with the drama.
Hi, Brian.
So, Lisa, there is people that are unhappy. They ran not supporting Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. But is this going to go anywhere?
Well, and you've also had 17 people sign onto a letter saying that they're not going to support Nancy Pelosi, even on the House floor. And that's where her her biggest challenge lies, because she's ultimately likely going to get the behind-the-scenes votes on November 28th. It's the January 3rd vote. She has to get to 218, which is potentially an issue for her. And I think that if it's this hard for her to wrangle her caucus, I think it's sort of a sign of what's to come for her. And I really think she's going to have some difficulties on her hand next Congress of keeping her caucus together. And it was interesting because she apparently had a meeting with some centrist Democrats, and she had named the House Freedom Caucus of, we don't want to have that kind of problem next caucus or next Congress. So I think she's acutely aware that this is going to be an issue for her. And you have a growing progressive wing of the party. I think there's around 90 members in the Progressive Caucus. That's going to be a really big challenge that she's facing.
That's a great point, because a lot of people ran as almost like Republicans in Republican districts and won as Democrats. Democrats. And then you have many who are to the left of the San Francisco Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi.
Right.
But in the end, Kathleen Rice was quoted today as saying, you know, she's a New York Congresswoman. She says, don't expect somebody else to emerge until it's clear that Nancy Pelosi doesn't have the votes. But is Marcia Fudge emerging? They met on Friday.
Well, I've seen her name she's put her name out there, probably tepidly sort of saying, you know, what kind of support she could get. I don't know. I think Nancy Pelosi is ultimately going to get the speaker's gavel. Tim Ryan ran against her the last leadership go-around, got about 63 votes. That's the largest defections she has seen in her leadership fight that she's ever seen. I think, you know, nearly a third of the caucus voted against her. So you might see some defectors potentially, but I think ultimately she is going to end up being the speaker.
What's behind the president saying if Nancy Pelosi needs the votes, I'll supply Republicans?
I don't know. I don't know if he's trolling her. That's a good. I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately. I'm not quite sure. I don't know if he's trolling her and just, you know, kind of just putting it out there and, you know, sort of being, you know, a little bit mischievous. Or if he sees her as a more viable option as Speaker of the House, potentially sees her as more willing to work with him than, you know, maybe someone who's even more progressive than Nancy Pelosi. But one thing I will point out, I was at the NRCC in 2010 where there were a lot of ads using Nancy Pelosi's face against the Democrats incumbents who were running. And Alan Boyd, a Democrat who was outgoing, who lost that election cycle, said that she was the face that defeated us. So I think with Democrats in power again in the House, that is ultimately going to be an issue for them in 2020.
If you get elected by saying, I'm not going to support Nancy Pelosi, and the first thing you do is support Nancy Pelosi, that could be a problem in 2 years.
Right. And sometimes that happens, too.
Right. Lisa Booth, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
She, by the way, is very cold, but didn't complain the entire segment. All right, coming up straight ahead, Ron DeSantis winning the Florida race for governor again. And he says...
Here are some quick headlines for you today. Saudi Arabia's King Salman will give his first address since the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. It is unclear whether he's going to talk about the Washington Post columnist. It comes days after the CIA concluded that the Saudi crown prince ordered Khashoggi's death, something the Saudi kingdom is denying. And the British Army making plans to put troops on the streets if Brexit falls apart. 1,200 troops already on standby as part of Operation Temporer to help keep order during the emergencies. That's only happened twice, both times after terror attacks.
Meanwhile, the heated Florida races have now been declared over, and Ron DeSantis has been elected governor again.
What a remarkable comeback story. Joining us right now to discuss this victory is Governor-elect Ron DeSantis. Governor, anything but easy, but were there any doubts in the interim from Election Day to today that you'd be, at this moment, Governor-elect of Florida?
No, I mean, look, it's the only thing better than being elected governor of Florida is being elected twice in 2 weeks. And so, you know, we had a margin on election night. It was a close race, but it was definitive that I had won. And even with some of the votes that turned up in Broward, I mean, my margin was significant enough. We knew the machine recount was not going to change it, and it didn't. And I also had confidence that Governor Scott would end up winning the recount, both the manual and machine recount there. So I think that's great that it happened and that we're moving on now. Obviously, we're going to have to address some of the problems with the election administration in places like Broward and Palm Beach County. I think it's good that Brenda Snipes has submitted her resignation. There was no way as governor that I was going to let her preside over another election down there after all the problems that they had. So we had 65 counties do a good job. We had 2 that dropped the ball. We want to make sure all 67 counties do these elections in a fair way.
What happens next? You'll appoint someone to take over for Dr. Snipes?
It depends on when her resignation is effective. I heard it was going to be effective sometime in early January, about the time I'm being sworn in. So, yeah, then that'll fall to me to appoint her replacement. If she has resigned immediately, then Governor Scott would have a window to appoint it before he leaves office.
Well, Mr. DeSantis, what do you make of the fact that these races, not only Senate, but governor and ag commissioner, were so close? What does that say about Florida? That the state is pretty much split right down the middle, 50-50? Or that the state is just bad at counting?
No, look, it's always been a competitive state. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. Donald Trump won Florida by a couple points. Barack Obama in 2012, I think it was like 0.5%.
Yeah.
And so that's just how Florida elections are. The Democrats turned out way more voters than they did in 2014. But I think what we did on the Republican side is we made sure we turned out our voters. So there kind of was a blue wave. We just were able to overcome it.
Andrew Gillum was called by the President of the United States a force to be reckoned with. No one doubts his talent, composure, and charisma on the stump. What was he like to compete against?
Well, he was a very formidable opponent, and I said that from the beginning. I mean, no one thought he could win the Democratic primary, but if you watched him, he out-debated all those people. He was the only one that inspired anybody with enthusiasm, and I think the fact that he was their nominee, he was really responsible for driving a lot of these Democrats to vote who don't normally vote in midterm elections, and so it was tough. It was a tough fight.
What's on the agenda for you? What do you plan on doing when you're sworn in?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to baby-proof the governor's mansion because I have a 2-year-old daughter and an 8-month-old son, and so we want to make sure that there's all kind of Florida history in there, and I don't want my daughter bringing that crashing down. But we've got a lot to do from economic development. We're going to do a lot of education reform. I'm going to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. Basically, as soon as I take office, we're going to have to look and make sure our elections are run well. And so there's a whole host of things we're going to be able to do. It's going to be an exciting time in Florida.
I saw your ad that showed your child in it, and you were reading them Art of the Deal. How much did the president help you get over the finish line?
Well, he did 2 big rallies in Florida down the stretch, one in Southwest Florida and one in Northwest Florida. And I think if you look at the type of turnout we were able to generate, I think a lot of his voters he was able to activate and bring them out. And so I think that he played a very, very important role in this. And you look throughout the country, these races where he was campaigning, Missouri, North Dakota, these places, all those candidates won. And so, I think Donald Trump has a very good base of support in the state of Florida and in some of these other states where he was able to help engineer these victories.
All right. So no doubt about it, in Florida, he had a huge impact in the Senate race and the governor's race. Governor-elect Ron DeSantis, congratulations. What a story. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Meanwhile, on this Monday, you've heard the left claim President Trump is undermining democracy. Well, now Congressman-elect and Navy SEAL Dan Crenshaw has just one question.
Democratic freedoms have been undermined. We just had an election where we switched power in the House. Democracy is at work. People are voting and we're in record numbers.
Dan Bongino says Crenshaw did the country a favor. He's going to react live to more of his soundbite coming up.
And it's a high-speed horror. A race car driver goes airborne at 170 miles per hour. Hours later, the teenager behind the wheel. That's coming up.
If you live in a house, you have walls, you have doors, you have gates, and so we do that because we don't want to let just anybody go into our house. And I consider this country my house on a larger scale, and we should control our borders.
There you've got some residents of Mexico talking about the caravan, which is just south of San Diego, California at this
Tijuana.
Yeah, over in Tijuana. Dan Bongino's been following this, former NYPD officer, former Secret Service agent, and author of Spygate, the attempted sabotage of Donald J. Trump. So President Trump has been accused of trumping up this story for the midterm elections and using terms like invasion. And some people like Jim Acosta were offended by that word. Maybe he should take that question to the mayor of Tijuana, because he's calling it an invasion, a tsunami that has hit his city.
Yeah, Brian, I don't think the liberal media and the open borders advocates around the globe understand just how badly this story is blowing up in their face. What the worst part about this, though, and think about this for a minute, and I think the light bulb will go off, right? This is to a lot of people in the audience. Illegal immigration, especially an incident like this where it's in mass and it's going to be absolutely almost impossible to control in an orderly fashion. illegal immigration is almost always discussed in terms of how it affects the person coming here illegally or a migrant. It's almost never discussed how it affects the American citizens and the residents of a city like Tijuana. Now that you're starting to see people finally object and say, hey, you can claim asylum, but there's a way to do it, and this isn't it. Now you're finally seeing some coverage and some backlash on it. This is not going to end well for liberals pushing for open borders.
Hey, Dan, the president tweeted this. Catch and release is an obsolete term. It is now catch and detain. Illegal immigrants trying to come into the USA, often proudly flying the flag of their nation as they ask for U.S. asylum, will be detained or turned away. Dems must approve border security and wall now. Does this prove what we're seeing down there? Does it prove that we need to be tougher, tighter on our border security?
Yeah, there's no question. Catch and release was a disaster. Ainsley, it's just
All right, Dan, let's talk a little bit about this. You know, it has been very clear from the get-go that a lot of members of the mainstream media do not like Donald Trump. Listen to this montage of members of the media talking about how the president is attacking the press and our freedoms.
What we're witnessing right now is just this erosion of our freedoms in terms of covering the President of the United States.
Our democracy is in crisis. What we've seen in the last months and so many ways is degrading the rule of law, delegitimizing our elections.
It's important for this majority in the House to engage in some really critical oversight of an administration that is undermining a lot of critical freedoms for folks in our country.
So that is what we've heard a lot in the last number of months. Until yesterday, down in Texas, they have elected Congressman Dan Crenshaw. He's that Navy SEAL who lost his eye. He was on Face the Nation yesterday, and he was asked about how the president is undermining democracy with his attacks on the press. And he had heard enough of it, and he said this, Dan Bongino.
I always ask the question, like what? You know, like, what is he undermining exactly? You know, what democratic freedoms have been undermined? We just had an election where we switched power in the House. Democracy is at work. People are voting and we're in record numbers. I always ask for examples, and then we can hit those examples one by one. And if it's worth criticizing, it's worth criticizing. But just kind of this broad brush criticism that the president is somehow undermining our democracy, I always wonder what exactly we're talking about.
And he went on to say, somebody said, well, the president is attacking the press. And he goes, wait a minute. I've actually been attacked. Be careful about the words you use.
You know, I got to tell you, I'm really starting to love this Dan Crenshaw. This guy's great. He has asked the question I've been begging everyone to ask forever. How? How is the president undermining democracy? Do you understand how foolish that makes you look when you say it and you produce examples that are the opposite of what you're suggesting? Think about it, Steve, right? He's undermining what? Your economic democracy? How? By giving you back more of your money in a tax cut? How idiotic is that? He's undermining press democracy or freedom of the press? How? Steve, the guy gives press conferences when he's in the bathroom. The guy is always giving press. This guy's answered more questions than you guys have asked in what, 20 years in the media? He can't stop answering questions, and he's undermining the free press. Oh, well, he threw out Jim Acosta. Yeah, he threw out Acosta, who's now right back in the process because they went to the courts. And what did Trump say about it? Okay, fine, we'll institute some rules. Wait, one more. Oh, he's undermining democracy. How? By not forcing you to buy Obamacare and dumping the individual mandate? This is the most democratic president we've seen in decades. This is so dumb. You're making yourself look silly by saying it, and a big round of applause to Dan Crenshaw for finally calling people out on it.
All right.
See, you got me going on that.
Holy cow, who needs coffee?
Excited.
Yeah, now he's
really. I didn't even have one yet.
It's amazing that SNL hit that was so inappropriate, that was rectified the following week, which was last week, has really put him in the spotlight, and I think he's really shining.
Oh, incredible. He is really wonderful. That was a great line. And he asked the common sense question every American should ask. How is Trump anti-democratic? It's nonsense.
And Mr. Crenshaw is part of the incoming Congress.
And he shares your name. Thank you, Dan Bongino, for being with us.
It's a great name. Thanks, guys.
All right, let's hand it over to Jillian. She has some more headlines for us. Hey, Jillian.
That's right. Good morning. Hope you're having a good day so far. Let's start with this. Whoever killed an American teacher in Mexico will pay. A Mexican governor vowing revenge on the Sinaloa cartel drug trafficker accused of murdering Patrick Braxton Andrew. The North Carolina man's remains just recovered after he disappeared on a hiking trip last month. It's unclear how Braxton Andrew was murdered or what evidence officials have against the cartel. A race car driver loses control, flies through the air, and slams into a barrier at 170 miles per hour. Stop what you're doing and watch this. That is frightening. That is driver Sophia Flores crashing on the Formula 3 course in China. The German teen who fractured her spine tweeting in part, quote, "Just wanted to let everybody know that I am fine." 5 other people were hurt. An experimental new treatment could be a, quote, game changer for children with peanut allergies. Researchers in the U.S. and UK gave kids a drug made with a small amount of peanut proteins, then increased the amount over a few months. By the end, 2 of 3 children could eat peanuts without any allergic reaction. Researchers hope to get FDA approval next year. More than 1 million kids in the U.S. have peanut allergies. Condoleezza Rice shutting down reports her beloved Cleveland Browns wanted her to coach. The former Secretary of State writing on Facebook, quote, "I love my Browns, and I know they will hire an experienced coach to take us to the next level." And, quote, "I do hope that the NFL will start to bring women into the coaching profession." Rice also saying she'd like to call a play or two next season. The Browns says she is not in the running for the job. So look at your headlines. A lot of people talking about that one this morning.
Yeah, because Adam Schefter said it. He's almost never wrong.
Yeah.
But how could that possibly be?
Well, look, I think anyone can do better than Hugh Jackson. I think, won 3 games out of 40, so
yeah, right.
Maybe.
He forgot to win last year.
And if you're almost never wrong,
right.
you could be wrong this time.
I know. He's almost never wrong.
All right,
but
Jillian.
her dad was a coach.
All right, Jillian, thank you very much. Meanwhile, Janice Dean, the weather machine, is going to join us outside to tell us that rain and snow is coming here.
Oh, you know what? Not too bad, actually. Today is really nice. Where are you from?
San Antonio, Texas.
What are your names?
Ruben and Rose Guerra.
I love San Antonio. What do you think of the weather here so far?
It's fabulous. It's been awesome.
Yeah, what are you going to do today?
We're going to the 9/11 Memorial and also over to the Brooklyn Bridge.
Awesome. And you're on Fox and Friends right now.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Yes, awesome.
Let's take a look at your weather for our San Antonio folks here in the Northeast. It's 45 right now across the Great Lakes, interior Northeast sections. That's where we're going to get a little bit of the rain, snow mix. Here along the coast, we're okay. And the good news is, as we head into this busy travel week, we have a fairly quiet weather pattern. Now, we are going to potentially see a little bit of moisture sneaking up across the Ohio Valley in towards the Northeast and the Great Lakes. And we have a system moving into the West Coast we're going to watch as well, which is going to bring some much needed moisture to folks in California. But there's our Thanksgiving Day forecast. Not too bad. 27 here in New York City. All right. You want to say hi to Steve, Ainsley, and Brian in the studio?
Hi. The Riverwalk. We love San Antonio.
Yes, we love San Antonio. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the Alamo.
Right,
and the Alamo.
Yeah.
Check out Fox Nation coming soon.
Yep, very soon, the 27th. Meanwhile, 17 minutes before the top of the hour, President Trump says the answers are finished for special counsel Robert Mueller.
We gave very, very complete answers to a lot of questions that I shouldn't have even been asked.
But law professor Jonathan Turley says there's nothing easy about the Russia probe. He's here to explain. All right, some quick sports headlines right now. Week 11 of the NFL was marred by a scary sight that we're actually not going to show you the actual hit. Alex Smith, a brutal leg break, carted off the field, done for the year. NASCAR, Joey Logano races to his first career championship. Logano winning the final race of the season, Homestead Miami Speedway, after making the playoffs last season. The underdog beating out the so-called Big Three, Martin Truex Jr., Kyle Busch, and Kevin Harvick. Now to Steve to talk to somebody very smart.
Thank you very much indeed, Brian. After saying he very easily answered the Mueller questionnaire, President Trump explains what he meant with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday yesterday.
We gave very, very complete answers to a lot of questions that I shouldn't have even been asked. And I think that should solve the problem. I hope it solves the problem. It wasn't a big deal. You know, they make it like I had meetings for many, many hours. I got the questions. I responded. We wrote them out. I read them once. I read them a second time. We made some changes. That's it. They're very simple. You know why? I did nothing wrong.
But is it that simple? Here with reaction is, as you can see right there on your screen, constitutional law professor at George Washington School of Law, Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, good morning to you.
Thank you, Steve.
You think it's either a good thing or a bad thing that the president said, I answered them very easily?
Well, nothing is easy in the Mueller investigation. Those people that were indicted by Mueller found it very easy to charge them on statements that they made that were found to be inaccurate or conflicting with other evidence. I mean, for the most part, when it comes to U.S. defendants, these charges come closer to missteps than malfeasance. They're largely false statements made to investigators as opposed to core crimes.
Right.
And so that's obviously the greatest concern for attorneys representing the president.
So it seems to be all about the Russia collusion thing, no obstruction of justice stuff.
Right. Now, that leaves us in an intriguing position. Once these answers are put in, Mueller could go ahead and issue a report just on collusion, hold the rest of the stuff for a second report, and that would allow the House of Representatives under Democratic control to start to move forward. Now, obviously, a lot of Democrats have a type of Agatha Christie sort of strategy here. They're hoping that the final scene, Mueller's going to reveal all of the critical evidence that he kept from the readers up to this point. But so far, the narrative that is in all these previous filings really have one conspicuous omission, and that is a direct connection, not just to Trump, but to Trump officials in a true collusion conspiracy.
And finally, exit question, this could all be leading up to, still, he could have in his pocket, ladies and gentlemen, a subpoena. Mr. President, come on down.
Yeah, that is the most intriguing possibility, that because the White House said we really don't want obstruction answers, we have objections to them, that he could have waited to the last stage and then he could hit him with a subpoena. And this would go into a very different place very quickly.
Well, it's after the midterms. It's Robert Mueller's next move. We'll see what happens. Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Meanwhile, the number is stunning. Household debt hitting a record $13.5 trillion. So how can you get out from under that? Well, it's not all on one person's shoulders, but it's across all of the people. Chris Hogan has tips coming up next. And scared to talk politics on Thanksgiving, the New York Times has a solution. Meet the angry Uncle Bot.
He apparently isn't helping some Americans who are deep in debt. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York reporting that total household debt increased by $219 billion to a record high $13.5 trillion in the third quarter of 2018. Joining me now with how you can get out of that debt is personal finance expert with Ramsey Solutions and author of Everyday Millionaires, Chris Hogan. Hey, Chris, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I was a little shocked by this because the economy's doing well, but we're seeing record high debt. Why is that?
Well, when you look at debt and you start dealing with it, Ainsley, it's less about income and it's more about lifestyle. So Americans have an appetite for debt. It's actually alarming. And to take it a step further, 5% of all debt is in some form of delinquency. So that means we're not only taking on more debt, we're also falling behind.
Are people just not caring that they're in debt anymore?
Well, people have become numb to debt. It's become a way of life. It's normal. You know, the average credit card debt's hovering around $16,000 per household. And so it's scary. And when people have this appetite for debt, they just keep spending and spending. And let's be honest, this holiday season, this isn't when people catch up on their debt or pay it down. This is typically when people add to it because they're buying with money they don't have. And this is alarming.
So, Chris, how do we get out of debt?
Well, we first have to make a decision. Understand that debt's not your friend. It's a threat to your now as well as your future. So let's get out of the debt. Let's attack it. So list your debt smallest to biggest. We call it the debt snowball. Just write it down, smallest to biggest. And I want you to make minimum payments on all the other debts except for the little one. I want you to attack it, Ainsley. I want people to sell some stuff, take on an extra job, attack that debt. And this is all debt except for your mortgage. If you do this, you'll take back control. And eventually when you pay off off the debt, you'll give yourself a raise because you get to keep more of your money with you.
Yeah. Good advice, especially for Christmas time, because we're all spending more money. Thank you so much.
We really do. Yes, and we need to spend with cash. And remember, not all gifts need to require you to go into debt. Set a budget,
Correct.
spend cash, and give a gift.
That's right. Thank you so much, Chris. Great to see you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The recount is done, but the fallout is far from over. Embattled election supervisor Brenda Snipes reportedly on her way out. We are live in Florida with that story coming up next. Plus, Florida Senator-elect Rick Scott, Congressman Trey Gowdy, and Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, as well as Willie Robertson. They're all live coming up.
Big news. The ballot chaos in Florida now over.
The only thing better than being elected governor of Florida is being elected twice in 2 weeks. I think it's good.